So heaven forbid that you're a clinic who heavily depends on TPAs.
Yeah.
Hey guys, what's going on? I'm actually here with Chelsea Treseder from MVP, which is My Vitals Pro. Does everybody else just call it MVP?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So with MVP now, there are some interesting industry updates that you have about the hearing care industry, and I want to jump into it. So we're talking about data from 2025, correct?
Yep.
And 2025 was a crappy year.
It was.
For some people more than others.
Correct.
But can you give us some of the highlights of 2025?
Yes, absolutely. So we just did our 2025 year in review last week, which was a really fun and educational exercise. We've been following the trends all year, as you know, coming out with information to the industry as things were happening, but it was nice to take a step back and look at a complete year. There was definitely some highlights and some lowlights. So kind of in summary, the good news was revenue and units and ASP all grew over the prior year. The bad news was new patients were off by quite a bit, and that's particularly concerning because we're in this wave of more and more baby boomers turning 65 every day. We're right in the heart of the greatest time where the most baby boomers are going to turn 65, so we would expect those new patient numbers to be growing.
And this literally flipped a switch like at the very beginning of 2025 because we actually had a webinar that you guys had hosted talking about this exact same thing at the beginning of the year.
Exactly, and we didn't know in that moment, is this just a blip that's hitting at the beginning of the year? For some reason, it's winter, there's weather, there's flu. Well, it turned out not to be a blip because when the whole year was done, we were almost 5% down year over year in new patients across the clinics in the MVP data set. So again, with the demographic wave we're experiencing right now, even flat new patient growth would be disappointing, and we actually had a decrease. There's another thing that we saw happen in 2025, which was totally ahistoric. So for as long as we've been tracking the data in MVP, our data goes back to 2010. We've been looking at TPA business, the third-party administrator managed care side of the hearing care business, for the last, say, decade or so. We have just seen year-over-year growth. It's just never stopped. And actually in 2025, every single month except one, except July, we saw a year-over-year decrease over the TPA business from the prior year. Totally ahistoric. We have seen growth in every quarter, every month for the last decade, basically. So that was really interesting as well, and it makes you wonder if it's not somehow related to the overall new patient numbers that we saw.
For sure, and you said that there's two theories that you may have that is actually leading to this. So what do you think the first one is?
Yeah, so our first theory is what we'll call strategic divestment. So this would be the case where a clinic maybe used to participate with some of the managed care companies or all of the ones in their market and have decided to opt out of all of those contracts or some of those contracts. So that's why we call it strategic divestment, choosing to remove yourself from those payers and those plans. We've seen clinics over the last few years get better at competing with the TPA benefits, if you will, which has been really encouraging to see. A lot of programs have come out to help clinics do that and offer a compelling alternative. Or they've simply looked at their numbers in MVP and said, this doesn't make sense for my business model and my profitability. So that's kind of theory one, that practices are deciding to opt out.
And that's basically what we did as a clinic. I mean, starting about 5 years ago, we're like, it makes no sense for us to stay involved with these third-party payers. And so we strategically started to remove ourselves one by one to the point where it only took us about 2 years or so. We are completely removed from TPAs, and we're much more successful now, I believe, because of that. So you're saying that could be, I think there's a big push inside of the hearing care industry to remove ourselves from having someone else control our businesses. And so hopefully that's a big part of it, but you're also saying there could be another thing that's responsible for this as well.
Yes, so we may have seen a drop in those units because the clinics that participate in MVP, which are largely independent private practices like Dr. Cliff's practice, they just said no thanks. And that would explain why we would see fewer of those units in the data set. The other theory is that it's a reduction in demand. So not so much a decision by the clinic, but fewer patients coming into the clinic with those benefits and those discounts and choosing to proceed with hearing care in that channel. So we did an analysis in our data set and looked at clinics who'd had a drop in TPA units in 2025 over their prior 2-year average. We looked at clinics who had dropped more than 65%, and we called those clinics likely strategic divestors. Because if you're down 65% or more, you've probably made a conscious decision to pull out of those contracts. And then we looked at the other set of clinics, which were those who were down less than 65%. And we said, that's probably not as much a strategic divestment as it is just a simple reduction in demand of that patient type. And we found about a 30-70 split. So about 30% of the drop was related to strategic divestment, and 70% was related to a reduction in demand.
No kidding. That's crazy. So let's talk about this this reduction in demand, because if we're talking TPAs, one of the biggest drivers of TPAs is Medicare Advantage plans.
Yep.
And so there's something crazy going on with Medicare Advantage right now.
Exactly, and anybody who's gone onto a news website online or picked up a newspaper in the last year or two, you've read some headlines about the struggles that many companies are having in the Medicare Advantage space. But when we look at hearing care more specifically, one thing that's really interesting is that we have been following what we call terminated non-crosswalked plans. So this gets a little bit technical here, but these are plans where the payer, so be it Humana or whoever it might be, looks at the different markets where they operate and they strategically divest. They decide not to offer that plan in that market any longer because, quite frankly,
maybe it's not profitable for them to do,
there.
Right?
Exactly. So they'll pull out of a market, and that's happened a little bit over time here and there over the last few years. But there was a totally ahistoric drop an increase in payers pulling out of markets when we began 2025. And when a plan like that pulls out of a market, there's two different options. They either crosswalk that member to a similar plan, but if there isn't a comparable plan that they can crosswalk someone into, it becomes what's called a terminated non-crosswalked plan. And there was a huge increase in those in 2025, right as we saw this first dip happening in the beginning of the year in TPA units. Because again, before we had all of 2025's data, we were looking at this in January and February and even March and April and saying, what is going on here? Normally, January is a big month for patients who want to use insurance benefits because plans have reset and deductibles and all of that. So it was really interesting to see. And so we looked at it, and there was such an increase in these terminated non-crosswalked plans that one of our theories is that it just kind of introduced chaos into the marketplace. So if you've had a certain Medicare Advantage plan for a long time and you're used to going to this doctor or this health system, and that gets disrupted and you're either reverted to traditional Medicare while you shop for a new plan and you have to establish new primary care and you're dealing with some of your other, really serious health concerns that you may have, it's possible that choosing to do something about your hearing care may fall to the back burner. We've known for years that patients wait 7, 5, whatever the latest market track data says. So, it's one of those more elective health concerns that you can wait on. So we think that possibly a lot of these patients were thrown into chaos. And it also looks like to have impacted physician referrals. So all of that's kind of tightly related in this insurance marketplace, and it definitely could have had an impact. Here's what's really interesting. When you look at the 2026 enrollment data, we're seeing a huge spike even over 2025 in terminated non-crosswalked plans. So if our hunch is correct, that introduced some uncertainty in the market and may have decreased the managed care referrals, the insurance referrals, the physician referrals, we'd better brace ourselves for more of that.
So heaven forbid that you're a clinic who heavily depends on TPAs.
Yeah.
I mean, that could literally ruin your business over the course of 2026. Now, you have data sets for this, and I mean, MVP is amazing because you guys can pull from all of these different private practice sources. Of course, we've been using it for several years now, but you saw something interesting with some of the, what you call your MVPs inside of the data set, which are clinics that are in like what you would say the top 15% of all the clinics?
Yep, so we take the top 85th percentile based on revenue per hour, and we call those our MVPs. And it's really interesting because when we looked at the MVPs against kind of everyone else in the data set, they actually had some things in common. For example, the MVPs were not immune to the drop in new patients that we saw, which you and I have talked about multiple times this year, where you kind of didn't realize that your new patient business was soft at the beginning of the year. And spoiler alert, Cliff's Clinic is an MVP clinic, so they weren't immune to some of these trends that we were seeing, as were a lot of other MVPs. However, they were able to still be really successful in 2025, and it came down to a few things that we noticed about that MVP group. One, they had less exposure to TPAs. This isn't going to be shocking. They did an even better job of upgrading their existing patients, so either converting tested not treated patients into converted patients or upgrading the technology of existing patients who had purchased. So, and MVPs took that to a whole nother level. And then they just had strong practice fundamentals. So higher ASP, higher premium technology splits. Again, a lot of things that happen in Dr. Cliff's clinic, but that we saw across a lot of other clinics that performed at that high level as well.
Really interesting. Now, me personally, I love using MVP. I think everyone out there, if you're running especially a private practice clinic, should be looking at your data. Now, how do people actually get in touch with you guys and find out what you can do with their clinic data?
Yeah, visit us online at myvitalspro.com. There's a really easy button. You can schedule a demo, 30 minutes. We'll get to know you and your clinic, find out where you're at, show you what the tool can do.
Chelsea, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.